It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of November 19th, 1999. And we've got three big movies to look at today, so let's just go ahead and jump on into it. We'll start off with the biggest new release of the weekend, James Bond, Pierce Brosnan once again returning as Agent 007 in The World Is Not Enough. So the 19th film in the James Bond series, the third to star Pierce Brosnan. The story is that you have the assassination of a billionaire, Sir Robert King, by the terrorist Renard, and Bond's subsequent assignment to protect King's daughter, Electra, who had been previously held for ransom by Renard. During his assignment, Bond unravels a scheme to increase petroleum prices by triggering a nuclear meltdown in the waters of Istanbul. And, as much as I criticize Tomorrow Never Dies for being kind of a huge step down from GoldenEye, I certainly enjoyed that more than this pile of garbage, which, surprisingly, is not the worst of the Bond films. We'll eventually get to that with the next Bond film, but, at least Tomorrow Never Dies had some pretty cool deaths in it, but this is a dull, mediocre movie. I mean, this is the story is just lame, it's predictable, the characters are very forgettable in here. I mean, do I even need to say why casting Denise Richards as the Bond girl was a really bad idea? I mean, there's a couple of things where I thought, okay, this is a really cool idea. Let's see where that pans out. Like the whole idea of Sophia Marceau being a bad guy in this, and I thought that was a cool idea, having a Bond girl be seen as a villain in this. But even with that, they don't really do a whole lot with it. It's just something that happens at the beginning of the movie, and then something that happens at the end of the movie. And it's just kind of like, yeah, you guys really didn't do a whole lot with it, and that's really the biggest problem with the movie. It's a waste of time and patience. Even the action sequences in this movie are not that exciting at all. They are really boring action sequences. This is directed by Michael Apted, too. He's a really good director, but man, what a major misstep on so many levels with this film. I've read that they were talking to people like Joe Dante, Peter Jackson to come on board for this and direct this movie, and they probably could have easily made this a much better Bond film than what this is. This is just bland and forgettable, but all things considered, though, we haven't gotten to the worst of the worst Bond movie ever. That's going to be coming up next, so we'll see in 3 years for that one for Die Another Day. But as far as The World Is Enough is concerned, The World may not be enough, but a better director would be more than enough to fix this movie. I would say that, but so that's The World Is Not Enough, so let's go ahead and move on to our next film, and that is Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. So Sleepy Hollow, you pretty much know the story already. It's loosely based on Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was famously adapted into the Disney film The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And here you have kind of the same story that it is in there. You have a police constable, Ichabod Crane, played by Johnny Depp, who's sent from New York to investigate a series of murders in the village of Sleepy Hollow by a mysterious headless horseman. And you have characters played by Christina Ricci, Miranda Richardson, Michael Gambon, Casper Van Dien, Christopher Lee, Jeffrey Jones, and of course Christopher Walken, playing the headless horseman. And man, you know what? That is a really, really good performance by Christopher Walken as the headless horseman. I mean, he clearly is having the time of his life playing this role. I mean, honestly, his scenes in the film probably are the most exciting things about this film. But it's not a bad movie per se. It's not a bad film at all. It is a very good Tim Burton film. This is what you expect from a guy like Tim Burton to do. I mean, this is definitely the type of film he would work on. This is definitely the type of film you would expect from the writer of Seven. And most notably, this was going to be directed by the guy who worked on Freddy Krueger and The Crypt Keeper. This was supposed to be his feature directorial debut, but disagreements between what the studio wanted to do with it eventually led to Tim Burton coming on board shortly after his Superman movie didn't go anywhere. But, yeah, the movie is fairly good. I like a lot of it. I don't think it's one of Tim Burton's best overall movies, but I like the ambition of it. I like the way that the visuals and the atmosphere just work so well to this film's advantage. And you could just tell that this film, Burton was clearly trying to make something unique and different, and it works for about maybe 75% of the film, but when that 25% doesn't really hold up as well as you would hope it would. It does get a little bit too silly at times. The dark humor in here is overall genuinely very good, but there are times when there are moments in here that, yeah, he had to throw that in there probably because somebody at the studio told him to do it, and, yeah, for the most part, this is a very solid film overall. It's a decent film. It could have been a really great film, though, considering that you have two a great chemistry of two different things. Tim Burton and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow coming together. That this should be the most amazing thing ever, and yet it kind of isn't. It's a passable movie. It's a film that has a lot of atmosphere and great visuals to go with it, and some great humor, great performances, great direction overall. The script needed a little bit of work to give it very much its own unique edge to it, to really make it stand out, but as it is, like I said, it's a good film, but it definitely could have been a really great film if Tim Burton, I think, had more control over it and had some better elements to the film's problems overall with it. But I enjoyed the film overall. I think it's fine. Definitely could have been a whole lot better though. So let's go ahead and move on to easily the best movie that came out this weekend, even though it was in limited release: Disney and Pixar's Toy Story 2. This is, of course, the sequel to the first computer-animated film ever released, which was Toy Story, which means that this is also the first sequel based off of a computer-animated film and Pixar's first sequel in general. The history behind this movie is one of the most amazing things that you will ever see. Let me just kind of sum up everything that went wrong with this movie to where it eventually became. This was originally envisioned as a direct-to-video sequel. It was produced in a separate building without Pixar. It was going to be part of the Disney direct-to-video library, pretty much on a small scale, as most of the main Pixar staff were working on A Bug's Life. The story reels proved promising, but then Disney decided to upgrade it to the film to a theatrical release because of it, but Pixar was unhappy with the film's quality, so John Lasseter, who was actually going to take a break after the promotional run of A Bug's Life, had to come back in. The story team from the first movie had to redevelop the entire plot over one weekend. And the idea, here's the craziest thing about this whole thing. Most Pixar films take years to develop. This thing, the established release date could not be moved, and the production schedule for Toy Story 2 was compressed in 9 months. They had 9 months from the time the movie came out to when they made these changes to make a movie. That is a lot of work to do on a film like this. And just when you think that it couldn't get any more insane or so much time had to be put into this, you also have to take into account that there was even a point when this movie was being made where somebody actually lost the movie. They had trouble finding the movie at some point. There was a lot of panic all around, and then all of a sudden, but luckily somebody actually did manage to save the movie. So just think about what had to happen here. You had to complete the film in 9 months, and then all of a sudden, this moment when you accidentally delete the film and you're in panic mode, and then luckily someone saves the film overall, and lo and behold, you're able to still get this out here. And then the fact that this movie had to be had to be made in that short amount of time, everybody was working their butts off to get this done. I read here that they have a lot of the overwork led to people with carpal tunnel syndrome, repetitive strain injuries. I mean, this is something that, this is the equivalent of watching an NFL football team having injuries every single game in the season. That's how bad this was. And you would think that after all of that, after everything that this film had to go through to get this film out in time for November, this thing probably would have been a disaster. This is the type of film that development hell projects are mostly notoriously known for. And this thing probably could have crashed and burned easily. And yet, after everything that happened, between the 9 months it took to get this movie out, they not only made a movie that was actually good, not only great, but somehow better than the original Toy Story. That is amazing to think about. It's a hard thing to top something as great as the first Toy Story film. When you take into consideration that they had half of the original film already finished, canned, had to restart a year before the film's release, and then had that moment when everything was gone for a few minutes, for a few days, and then for a little bit, and then all of a sudden you get it back on track. The fact that they were still able to make this one of the best sequels ever is an impressive feat for a studio that was only making computer animation for 4 films at that point. Pixar hadn't even been making computer animated films for less than a decade, and this was their biggest task to handle, and they pulled it off big time here. So that is incredible stuff here. And I basically told you that story without even telling you what the plot is. And You probably know what it is already, but basically Woody is stolen by a toy collector played by Wayne Knight, prompting Buzz and his friends to rescue him, and Woody is tempted with the idea of immortality in a museum when he realizes that he's part of a TV show from back in the 60s with Stinky Pete and Jesse, both played by Kelsey Grammer and Joan Cusack. Good Lord, that would be much different if it was John Cusack. But a lot of the same people are back from the first movie, and most notably, like I said, Cusack, Grammer, Estelle Harris playing Mrs. Potato Head is added here, Wayne Knight as the toy collector, Jodie Benson as Barbie, which apparently had a hard time getting into a movie until the Margot Robbie film did, but somehow for the longest time, this was the only Barbie that a lot of people had, like over 20 years, and this was the only one that they had, But like I said, man, this is an amazing, amazing sequel. The fact that they had all that going on behind them, and they were able to come up with a story that not only really works and gives the film a lot of maturity too. There's a lot of good emotional moments in here, like Jessie's song, the song that she sings in the movie when she talks about her original owner, and like you kind of, and there's a point where you do want Woody to really think about this. Like, does he really want to go back to being with Andy's toy? To know that, or accept the idea that he has kind of a small family here, that that they can last forever in here, and you do kind of feel the dilemmas here. Like there's not an element in here where something is forced into this film that doesn't feel genuine or doesn't feel legitimate, and it does have I will admit, kind of a twist that you don't see coming at first. Like, even after a couple times you see it, you do kind of catch on immediately, but that first time you see it, it's just kind of like, oh, I didn't see that coming at first. Like, but on top of that, they all add all these other elements to it. The comedy is much better, the animation is much better, the storytelling is much better, the music is great. Randy Newman does another great job with the score. This is a phenomenal film. I mean, it's amazing how the Toy Story series had 3 great films that somehow got better and better and better with each film. And even with Toy Story 4, which I know a lot of people really did not like, but I still like it. I still consider that kind of a bonus film to the Toy Story series. No, it's not as good as the other 3 films, but it's still a really good film. And it does serve as a nice, serviceable conclusion for Woody's storyline in that film. At least I thought it did, But yeah, Toy Story 2 was a massive achievement on so many levels, from the fact that it went through all that trouble in production to have it come out as the great film that it is. That takes a lot of balls to get that done within 9 months, and you got to give the guys at Pixar a lot of credit for making that happen. And because the hype of the film was so strong, the film did massive gangbuster numbers, went on to gross $500 million, won a Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Comedy at the Golden Globe Awards. This thing could have easily been nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, but of course Toy Story 3 later went on to do that. But, I mean, it's a classic film. It's a classic film on so many levels. I mean, what more do I even need to say about it? Toy Story 2 is one of the great animated films of all time. The fact that it surpassed the achievements of the first film is amazing, and not much more you can say about it. Toy Story 2 is a massive achievement on so many levels, and one of the best animated films you'll probably ever see. Toy Story 2, if you haven't seen it by this point, for God's sakes, go out and see it. Stop what you're doing and go find it somewhere. Go to Disney Plus and watch it. I mean, there's so many different ways to watch this movie. Just go out there and watch it if you haven't seen it already, which most of you probably have, but there's probably that one person out there that hasn't, so get out there and go see it, man. Jeez. So with that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Now, next week, Toy Story 2 is the big new release, but we just covered Toy Story 2, so what 2 other movies had the balls to go up against Toy Story on Thanksgiving weekend? How about 2 films that have nothing to do with Thanksgiving whatsoever, and were basically R-rated movies that were being put, and even though the history shows that R-rated movies do not do well on Thanksgiving weekend, here's 2 attempts to try to break that. Arnold Schwarzenegger fighting the devil, which could be awesome. It's not, in End of Days. And then we have Joel Schumacher's latest film, Robert De Niro and Philip Seymour Hoffman in Flawless. So we'll see how those films turn out next time. 2 movies to look at, and we'll do that on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching. And if you want to see more videos like this, and if you want to see more videos like this, I think I just said that twice already, but regardless, if you want to see more videos, hit the like and subscribe button, and also don't forget to check out the previous episode, check out the playlist on the next page. I'm getting all flustered right now, so I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, as always, take care.